A tape was sent to CBS's censors within minutes. Alarm bells were ringing throughout the hallways. Instead of the usual comedy routine, the screen was filled with a sharp, bold political message far beyond the limits the network had ever allowed. "All right, you guys. I hired you as decorators. I want Billy the Kid to feel right at home. All right, first of all, I juggle one, now two. Ho ho ho, next. Who's next?" 6 days later, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was abruptly cancelled, without explanation, without a press conference, without a farewell. The tape never aired, but its aftershocks rippled through the television industry, sparking a fierce confrontation between artists and censors. From that moment on, the concept of free speech on American television was forever changed. What was going on behind the scenes? Who decided to pull the plug? And what was on the tape that sent CBS into a panic? Let's take a look back at the shocking incident that rewrote the rules of American television in the 1960s. American television was controlled by 3 major networks: NBC, ABC, and CBS. Every night, millions of families sat down to watch carefully edited programs that conformed to the moral, political, and cultural standards of the post-war era. In that context, CBS dominated the market with safe shows like The Ed Sullivan Show and Bonanza. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, live from New York, The Ed Sullivan Show. But as the anti-war movement spread and a counterculture grew among young people, CBS was forced to find a new way to keep its audience. The idea for the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour came not as a bold breakthrough but as a need to compete with NBC, especially in the Sunday primetime slot where Bonanza dominated the ratings. Tom and Dick Smothers, 2 brothers with a smart brother, dumb brother comedy style, had been popular on smaller shows and were considered a safe enough choice. CBS hoped they could reinvent the variety show format without causing content problems. The show premiered on February 5, 1967. The first episode went smoothly, sticking to the same format with musical numbers, light-hearted banter between the brothers, and some simple comedy. But behind the scenes, Tom Smothers had other plans. He didn't want to just be a distraction under the guise of humor. Tom began to introduce social ideas into the show. The seemingly harmless lines gradually became sharper, more while CBS focused on ratings. Tom took the opportunity to build a new playground, one where television did not avoid reality, but faced it and questioned it. Dick Smothers did not object, but was cautious. He played the role of Balancer, the host, who softened Tom's edgy statements. The change came gradually, slowly enough for CBS to not intervene early, but quickly enough for viewers to notice. The first notable guest was Pete Seeger, an icon of the anti-war movement. Then came artists like Harry Belafonte, Joan Baez, Jefferson Airplane, and The Who. The musical acts weren't just entertainment. They were statement songs about war, injustice, and freedom, aired in prime time on national television. In addition, the show began to hire younger, more politically minded writers, including Steve Martin and Mason Williams. The script gradually shifted from situation comedy to satire. Humorous folk songs were now interrupted by fictional debates about military policy, the church, or civil liberties. The show retained its familiar structured music conversation comedy, but the content inside changed completely. Viewership for the show grew steadily throughout its first season, especially strong among the 18 to 25 age group. College campuses began to see it as a voice of representation on television. Students began to share lines from the show as a trend. Meanwhile, many parents and local stations in the South began to send letters complaining about the content. CBS saw the split in its audience but continued to air it because the ratings were still higher than expected. Inside CBS, executives began to feel a loss of control. Tom refused to change lines if he felt it was necessary to keep the message intact. Many episodes were re-edited just before airtime or sent out behind schedule. Still, The show continued to air each week, adding a new challenge to CBS. The second season began with high expectations from both viewers and creators. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was no longer just a comedy show, it was a rare television platform for topics that were being avoided elsewhere. With viewership steadily growing, especially among younger viewers, CBS was willing to take risks as long as the show didn't push the envelope. But what boundary meant for Tom Smothers was changing every week. The musical performances continued to push the show's comfort zone. Jefferson Airplane performed a song that hinted at psychedelics. The Who performed My Generation, which was so destructive that the sound system crashed. Meanwhile, Joan Baez caused controversy by singing a song dedicated to her husband, who was in prison for opposing military service, an explanation that was cut from the U.S. broadcast. In addition to the music, the comedy portion of the show also began to challenge the media system. Pat Paulson, a comedian hired specifically for the editorial portion, performed a series of skits impersonating a presidential candidate. The speeches mocked current policies, making promises like, "If elected, I will build more potholes," to test the patience of voters. The content seemed harmless but embarrassed politicians because it accurately reflected the frustration of people about formality in politics. But the biggest rift with CBS came from David Steinberg. His sermon at Simulated Church sermons began airing in late 1968 with a sarcastic tone. Steinberg turned religious figures into symbols of political power, mixing scripture with current events. One October 1968 skit was vehemently rejected by several CBS affiliates as offensive to their beliefs, and CBS received more than 300 complaints in a single week. The public reaction was mixed. Students took notes from Steinberg in their notebooks. Unofficial video stores began reselling the cut clips. College newspapers published articles analyzing the show. For many young people, the show was the only American television show that reflected the reality they lived in. The more successful the show became, the more it embarrassed CBS. Censorship regulations became stricter. CBS required each episode to be submitted 10 days in advance for review. Tom Smothers repeatedly violated this deadline, deliberately prolonging post-production to keep the same lines. The confrontation between the creative team and CBS executives was no longer hidden. Meetings between the two sides gradually became tense. Although not officially announced, CBS began to closely monitor every script and every guest invited on stage. Dick Smothers now acted as a balancing act. He openly disagreed with Tom's every choice, but he did not publicly object. Keeping the show on the air became Dick's personal priority, while Tom's goal was to get the message out, no matter the consequences. By early 1969, CBS had lost all patience. Executives were discussing alternatives. Local affiliates in the South were threatening to pull the plug. Many sponsors were concerned. And then, when David Steinberg was brought back for another segment, this time more direct, more political, CBS knew the bar had been crossed for the last time. Forbidden Lecture. In early April 1969, an episode of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was completed in house production. The episode had a special detail that the show's writers knew well. David Steinberg was back with a new sermonette. CBS had warned that any appearance by Steinberg after the controversy late the previous year would pose a serious risk to the show. But Tom Smothers decided to bring him back, regardless of the consequences. The performance was set against a minimalist backdrop, a stage that mimicked a church. A spotlight focused on the pulpit, and Steinberg stepped out dressed as a rabbi. In less than 5 minutes, he took the audience from the biblical image of Moses to that of a modern-day anti-war activist. In the performance, Moses was not commanded by God to lead the Israelites across the sea, but by conscience, by young people who refused to fight in a war. The key part of the segment was a direct line. Moses looked straight at Pharaoh, saying, "Sorry, Mr. President, take your army and go. I will not help you any longer." The line was met with applause from the studio audience. But to CBS, it was a direct attack on the Nixon administration, something the executives had been trying to avoid for months. The piece ended with a short musical number. A folk group, modeled after Peter, Paul, and Mary appeared and performed a song called No More Promised Lands. The lyrics were about rejecting empty promises from the state, and called on young people to stop following the procession and redraw the map. The scene ended with Steinberg throwing his shawl into the audience and shouting, "Peace, not war, preach it." The tape was sent to CBS as usual, but unlike previous episodes, this one was blocked. Shortly thereafter, CBS claimed that the episode had missed its deadline for review and was in violation of its production agreement. Tom Smothers immediately countered, claiming that the tape had been sent to the Hollywood censors on time. The problem, he said, lay with the New York headquarters, where the review process had been unusually lengthy. In internal meetings, CBS executives headed by William Paley demanded that Steinberg's performance be completely removed if the episode was to be aired. Tom refused. On April 4, 1969, CBS terminated its contract with the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour. There was no formal press conference, no advance notice to viewers. The following week, the show. The fall in legacy for Tom and Dick Smothers was significant. The cut was a blow to their careers and reputations. They were not invited back to television for years, and nationally broadcast offers disappeared almost immediately. Tom became a difficult person to hire, considered too risky for the network. Dick, though more cautious, was also associated with the image of the other half of a controversial show. Every door that had been opened to them in the television industry was immediately closed. Behind the scenes, though, a quiet legal battle began. The Smothers Brothers sued CBS for breach of contract, claiming that the cancellation of the show, based on late episodes, was just an excuse. The lawsuit dragged on for nearly 4 years. In 1973, a court ruled in their favor, ordering CBS to pay more than $770,000 for violating the co-production clause. But with their legal victory, they never regained the status they once had on television. During that time, the relationship between Tom and Dick was also tested. Dick later said in an interview that he did not fully agree with Tom's stubbornness. He believed that if Tom had made some concessions, the show could have lasted longer and had a greater impact. But the two remained close on stage. Although they were no longer on television, they continued to perform live in small theaters, maintaining a loyal following. CBS's decision to pull the show had a ripple effect across the media industry. Many young producers, including Lorne Michaels, who would later create Saturday Night Live, saw it as a lesson in the limits of creative freedom when confronting the power structure of television. Michaels once said that, without the Smothers Brothers, there would be no SNL. The show's short existence was the first precedent for mixed media and political television. The show's influence extended beyond the industry. Young artists, especially in comedy, began to refer to the show as a symbol of suppression. Censored tapes became collectibles, passed around by students and independent artists. Some sketches that CBS had previously rejected were later discovered in writers' private archives, adding to the symbolism of censorship. In terms of reputation, the perception of the show and the Bros changed over time. In 2008, Tom Smothers received an honorary Emmy Award, nearly 40 years after it was taken off the air. In his speech, he said simply, "Peace is harder than war," a quote that has since been widely quoted in the media. In 2010, both were inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame, marking a belated but significant restoration of honor. Outside of the entertainment industry, their story is also seen as part of the history of free expression in America. Tom and Dick were included on the Nixon administration's enemies list in the early 1970s. Although they did not suffer the same direct consequences as some politicians, their appearance on the list was seen as clear evidence that the show had truly embarrassed the administration's something few television shows had done before. By 2022, the entire archive of the show, including scripts, tapes, and unaired sketches, was transferred to UC Santa Barbara. This marks the first time many of the show's internal documents have been made available to researchers, including some sketches that CBS had ordered destroyed. The digitization of the archives will help reshape the show's legacy, especially for a younger generation who never saw the heyday of protest television. When Tom Smothers died in late 2023, social media was flooded with show clips, old stage photos, and tributes from famous comedians. Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, and Sarah Silverman all mentioned him as one of the pioneers of modern political comedy. They spoke of him not as a legend of the past, but as part of the roots that made American television more daring and outspoken. But now, unexpectedly, the show is starting to re-enter popular memory through an unlikely source, internet. VHS tapes that were once passed around among college students are now digitized and spreading rapidly on YouTube, Reddit, TikTok, and other video sharing platforms. Echoes of a silent song, the line "Mom always liked you best," have become the soundtrack to countless memes and parodies. A clip of Patson's fictional 1968 campaign, in which he promised to solve all problems by waiting for them to go away, has been shared millions of times in the current political climate. Sketches once considered too sensitive are now considered classics of thoughtful satire. The rediscovery is not just nostalgia, but a belated recognition of a show that was ahead of its time. The UC Santa Barbara archives continue to be mined by researchers, students, and documentarians. Unaired footage, Tom Smothers' handwritten notes, cut sketches, and CBS response letters all add up to a fuller picture of the scale and intensity of the intervention the program endured. In small exhibitions, viewers get to see not only the finished product but also the struggles that went into every minute of airtime. The response from modern comedy has been clear. Contemporary hosts like John Oliver, Trevor Noah, and Hazen Minhaj have all acknowledged the influence of the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour on the way they produced their content. Not because of the format, but because of the way it demonstrated that comedy was not an escape from reality, but a tool for reaction and dialogue in media conferences. The show is cited as part of the process of forming modern critical television. Though no longer on the air, the show's resonance lives on through its quotes, its symbols, and its indomitable spirit. When excerpts from the Forbidden Sermon were re-aired at a memorial event at the New York Television Festival, young audiences got their first look at the entire episode, which had been banned from the air in 1969. Contrary to expectations of its obsolescence, the content remains sharp, even surprising, with a level of directness that few shows dare to display today. Looking back, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour doesn't call itself iconic. It was made iconic by the reactions it generated from audiences, from networks, from governments, and ultimately from popular culture. A show that was nixed for speaking out has become one of the clearest examples of how television can be bold, dissenting, and uncompromising. If you feel that what happened to the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour is not just a thing of the past, but something that still resonates today, leave a comment. What would you think if such a show aired today? Don't forget to like and share this video with anyone who loves television, freedom of expression, and wants to understand why a comedy act once caused a national debate. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe now. There are so many untold stories, banned episodes, and canceled stages waiting to be told again. Just like the Smothers Brothers did not silence